It was supposed to be a simple Sunday dinner. Nothing fancy. Just a chance to sit at the table with my family and feel like I belonged again. The roast was still steaming on the platter, the smell of garlic and rosemary filling the air. When it happened, a moment so sharp it cut through the warmth like broken glass. I can still see the way my son leaned back in his chair, arms folded, lips pressed tight in that familiar look of irritation, and the way my daughter-in-law's eyes flicked over me as if I were an inconvenience she couldn't wait to be rid of. I had just set down the last serving dish when she sighed loudly, a sound that carried more weight than any words. And then, casually, almost like she was talking about the weather, she said I needed to stop pretending I was still part of their life. The words landed like a slap. For a second, I thought I had misheard. The clinking of forks on plates, the hum of the ceiling fan, the soft laughter of the grandchildren, all of it kept going, as if nothing had shifted. But for me, everything froze. My chest tightened, my throat burned, and I stared at her, waiting for some sign that she hadn't meant it the way it sounded. But she did. I could see it in her eyes. The message was clear. I wasn't wanted. Not at the table. Not in their plans. Not even in their lives, if they could help it. In that instant, I felt both invisible and exposed, like I was standing in the middle of the room, stripped of every ounce of dignity. My mind scrambled, replaying every sacrifice I had made, every holiday I had hosted, every late-night phone call I had answered when they needed me. And here I was, being told to step aside, to let go, to disappear. I swallowed hard, trying to steady myself, but the bitterness rose anyway, coating my tongue with the metallic taste of betrayal. It's strange how quickly a moment can unravel you. One remark, one glance, and suddenly the walls you thought were solid crumble around you. That night, surrounded by people who shared my blood, but not my heart, I realized I had been fooling myself. Family wasn't always the safe place I wanted it to be. Sometimes, it was where the deepest wounds were made. And yet, as painful as it was, that moment was only the beginning. What they didn't know was that I was paying attention now. I was finally awake. And maybe I should take you back, so you'll understand how it all came to this. Looking back now, I can trace the lines that led me to that Sunday dinner table. None of it happened overnight. Betrayal rarely does. It's a slow drip, a gradual erosion of respect that you almost don't notice until one day the ground gives way beneath your feet. When my husband passed, I poured everything I had into keeping my family together. I took the night shifts at the grocery store, worked weekends at the diner, and somehow still managed to be there for every school play, every doctor's appointment, every scraped knee. I told myself the exhaustion didn't matter, because I was giving my children a life where they never had to wonder if they were loved. And for a long time, that was enough. I thought they understood the sacrifices. I thought they carried some gratitude in their hearts. But slowly, little signs began to show me otherwise. I remember the first time my son asked for help with rent. Of course, I gave it to him. I told myself that's what parents do. But it didn't stop there. Rent turned into car payments, and car payments turned into credit card bills. Each time, there was always a promise he'd pay me back when things got better. Things never did get better, but the requests kept coming. Then there was my daughter-in-law. At first, I welcomed her into the family with open arms. I thought of her as another daughter. But soon enough, I started noticing the sideways glances at my clothes, the comments about my old furniture, the way she seemed embarrassed when I showed up to school events with the grandkids. I brushed it off as insecurity. But deep down, I knew she thought I wasn't good enough for the life she envisioned.
And still, I kept giving, babysitting at all hours, loaning money I didn't really have, covering last-minute emergencies that always seemed to appear right when I was starting to find my own footing. They came to expect it, like it was my role to absorb the weight of their mistakes so they could keep moving forward without consequence.
What I didn't realize then was how much of myself I was giving away in the process. Each time I said yes, I carved off another piece of my own independence. I convinced myself it was love, but in truth, it was fear of being unwanted if I stopped being useful. The warning signs were all there. The sighs when I offered advice, the eye rolls when I shared stories from my past, the way they stopped inviting me to certain gatherings and only called when they needed something. It was like I had shifted from being a mother to being a service provider. And the love I thought was unconditional began to feel transactional. I tried to ignore it. I told myself families go through rough patches, that this was just a phase. But inside, resentment was quietly building, stacking itself layer by layer until it formed a wall I couldn't ignore. And that's why, when the real betrayal finally came, it didn't land out of nowhere. It was the cruel harvest of seeds that had been planted long before. I just hadn't wanted to see them.
What came next would prove that my worst fears were true, that I wasn't just being overlooked or taken for granted. I was about to find out that the people I had sacrificed everything for were willing to hurt me in ways I never thought possible.
The real betrayal didn't come wrapped in an argument or a harsh word. It came quietly, almost like a shadow creeping across the floor until it swallowed me whole. I discovered it the same week I had convinced myself that maybe I was just imagining things, that maybe my children weren't as dismissive as they seemed. I wanted so badly to believe the cracks in our family could be mended. But the truth was waiting for me in the form of a bank statement. I had gone online to check my balance, planning to transfer a little money to cover groceries. My heart nearly stopped when I saw the numbers. The savings account I had spent decades building money meant to keep me afloat in retirement was nearly empty. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. Maybe I had clicked the wrong account. Maybe the bank's system was down. I refreshed the page over and over, hoping the numbers would magically correct themselves. But they didn't. The withdrawals were all there, in black and white, carefully spaced out over months, large amounts, enough to make me dizzy just looking at them. And then I saw the names attached to the transfers. My son, my daughter-in-law, the very people I had trusted more than anyone else in the world. They hadn't just borrowed. They had siphoned money behind my back, pretending all the while that they were struggling, that I was their lifeline. The realization hit like ice water pouring down my spine. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was deliberate. Every sigh, every complaint about money, every request for help, it had all been part of something larger, something darker. They weren't just leaning on me. They were draining me dry. I sat there at the kitchen table, hands trembling as I stared at the numbers. The air felt thick, my chest heavy with a mix of disbelief and rage. How could they do this to me after everything I had given? every sacrifice I had made. How could they look me in the eyes and still choose betrayal?
But then came the twist, the one detail that changed everything. Buried in the list of transactions, I noticed one charge that didn't fit. It wasn't for bills or groceries or car repairs. It was for a down payment on a vacation rental at the beach. I remembered my daughter-in-law casually mentioning a trip, brushing it off as something a friend had invited her to join. I had smiled and wished her well, never realizing it was my money paying for her little getaway.
That single detail shattered whatever illusions I had left. This wasn't about survival. It wasn't about keeping the lights on or feeding the kids. It was about greed. It was about entitlement. And it was about a kind of carelessness that cut deeper than any insult at a dinner table ever could. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. The betrayal burned through me. But underneath the rage, something else began to stir. A spark I hadn't felt in years. Maybe it was anger turning into clarity. Maybe it was the stubborn part of me that had carried 2 kids on my back through harder times. Whatever it was, I knew right then they thought they had broken me. They hadn't. That discovery wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning. Because if they were willing to take everything from me, then I had no choice but to find the strength they had underestimated all along. For a day or two, I let myself sit in the heaviness of it all. The shock, the anger, the disbelief they pressed down on me like a weight I wasn't sure I could carry. But somewhere in that silence, something shifted. I realized I had 2 choices. I could let this betrayal bury me, or I could stand up and fight for what I had left. And the more I thought about it, the more I knew surrender wasn't an option. I started with small steps. I gathered every bank statement, every bill, every receipt I could find. I made folders and notes, as if I were building a case file. The more I organized, the stronger I felt. Each piece of paper was proof that I wasn't crazy, that what had been taken from me wasn't just imagined, it was real, and it was intentional. Still, I knew I couldn't do it alone. That's when help came from an unexpected place. My neighbor, Ruth, had always been kind to me. We'd shared cups of coffee on her porch and traded recipes over the years, but I had never truly leaned on her. One afternoon, she noticed I seemed distracted and asked if something was wrong. For the first time, I told someone the truth. I expected judgment or pity, but instead, she looked me in the eyes and said I wasn't alone. She knew people, an old friend who worked at a law office, a cousin who understood financial disputes. Suddenly, I wasn't just a mother left to pick up the pieces. I had an ally. With Ruth's encouragement, I began taking real action. We contacted the bank, documented every suspicious transfer, and started asking hard questions. I set up new accounts that only I controlled. I changed passwords, locked down credit, and made sure no one could access my money without me knowing. Each step felt like reclaiming a little piece of myself. But just when I thought I had uncovered the worst of it, the second twist revealed itself. In one of the files, I found paperwork with my signature, except it wasn't my handwriting. It was authorization for a loan I had never agreed to. A loan that had been draining monthly payments from my account. My stomach dropped when I saw whose names were tied to it. My son and his wife had forged my signature, using my credit to take out money they never intended to repay. That discovery hit harder than the first. It wasn't just stealing behind my back, it was pretending to be me, erasing my very identity for their own gain. I felt violated in a way that went beyond money. They had gambled with my future, assuming I would never find out. And yet, instead of breaking me, that realization lit a fire inside me. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't helpless. They had underestimated me, and that was their mistake. With Ruth by my side and the truth in my hands, I was ready to fight back. They thought they could strip me of everything. But what they didn't count on was that betrayal has a way of sharpening resolve. I was no longer just a mother hoping for love and respect. I was a woman preparing for battle. And the moment was coming soon, the confrontation I had spent my life avoiding. This time, I wouldn't be silent. I didn't have to wait long before they came circling back. My son showed up one evening with that same practiced look of concern, as if he were doing me a favor by checking in. He sat at my kitchen table, eyes darting around at the neatly stacked folders I had prepared, and told me he was worried about my finances. He said retirement was complicated, that maybe it would be easier if he and his wife managed things for me. I listened quietly, nodding, my face calm even as my pulse quickened. On the surface, I pretended to consider his words, letting him believe I was still the same woman who handed over credit cards and checkbooks without hesitation. Inside, though, I was steadying myself, rehearsing every detail of the plan Ruth and I had built. Over the next week, I let them think they were pulling me back under their control. I mentioned that I was planning to move some of my savings, that I was nervous about navigating the process alone. Their eagerness gave them away. They leaned in too quickly, offering to help with the paperwork, suggesting they could handle the transfers for me. I smiled and agreed, careful to hide the satisfaction brewing beneath the surface. What they didn't know was that every step had been documented. With Ruth's friend at the law office guiding me, we had set up accounts designed to track every move. The so-called transfers they thought they were arranging were actually leading straight into evidence proof of their manipulation, proof of their intent. I remember the tension of those days, the careful balance of pretending to be vulnerable while holding the truth in my hands. It felt like walking a tightrope. Every word and gesture a test of how well I could play the part. But for the first time, I wasn't the one being fooled. The climax came when they sat across from me. Papers spread out on the table, their voices warm and reassuring as they explained how simple it would be for me to sign. My heart pounded, but I kept my expression neutral. I picked up the pen, let it hover just long enough for them to believe I was giving in, and then I set it down. I looked my son straight in the eyes and told him I knew everything. The forged loan documents, the missing savings, the beach trip they had paid for with my money. His face went pale, the color draining like water from a cracked glass. His wife tried to interject, but I stopped her with one raised hand. I didn't need shouting or tears. I had the proof, and they knew it. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the sound of my own breathing. For the first time in years, I felt taller, stronger, unshakable. They weren't in control anymore. I was. That confrontation was the breaking point. The moment the lies collapsed and the truth stood bare. But exposing them wasn't the end of the story. It was only the doorway into what came next, my decision about how to move forward, what justice would look like, and how I would rebuild a life that was finally mine. In the days that followed the confrontation, I felt a calm I hadn't experienced in years. The storm had passed, and for the first time, I wasn't standing in the wreckage, I was standing on new ground. My children avoided me after that day, and though the silence was heavy at first, I came to see it as a blessing. I no longer lived under the constant weight of their demands or manipulations. With Ruth's help, I secured my finances, rebuilt what I could, and put protections in place so no one could ever misuse my trust again. It wasn't easy. There were nights when the loneliness crept in, when I wondered if I had made a mistake by drawing such firm boundaries. But then I would remember the bank statements, the forged documents, the look on their faces when the truth came out. And I knew I had chosen the only path that honored my worth. As for them, the consequences arrived naturally. Word spread through the family, and the respect they once took for granted slipped away. They found themselves isolated, not because I punished them, but because truth has a way of revealing itself. Friends and relatives who had once admired their charm began to see the cracks. Eventually, they had to live with the weight of their choices, and that was something only they could carry. Meanwhile, I discovered a strength in myself that had been buried for far too long. I started small, volunteering at the local library, reconnecting with people who valued me for more than what I could provide. I found joy in little things again, morning walks, fresh coffee, evenings on the porch, and slowly, I built a life that wasn't about what I had given up, but about what I was creating for myself. The greatest lesson I learned is that it's never too late to start over. We tell ourselves that our value is tied to what we do for others, especially as parents, but the truth is simpler and stronger. Our value comes from who we are, not what we give away. Respect should never be conditional. Love should never be a transaction. If you've ever felt like a burden, if you've ever been made to believe your worth depends on how much you sacrifice, I want you to hear me clearly. You are more than what others take from you. Sometimes the hardest thing we'll ever do is stand up and say, enough. But on the other side of that decision is freedom, dignity, and a peace you can't put a price on. So here I am, living proof that broken trust doesn't have to break you. Betrayal can be the very thing that sets you free. And now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever faced a moment where someone you loved deeply betrayed your trust? How did you find your way forward? Share your story in the comments, because your voice matters. And if my story resonated with you, please like this video, share it with someone who might need it, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Because sometimes the darkest moments in life don't mark the end. They mark the beginning of who we were always meant to be.